So the next section I've got is plant visual analysis. It says assessing plant status. There's a lot of slides in this section, so I'm going to try to run through a bunch of them and give you some of the key points here. And you can refer back to them later if you want. So, all right, I talked about this already. Assessing plant status. Start with an overview of the patch, general glance, questioning attitude, ask, listen, what comes to you, sentience, intuition, spirit, divas. I think I made all those points already. So when you're looking at plants and trying to understand what's going on with them, obviously the one point is to be receptive to what comes to you, but another point is to look at their physiology. You can see how happy an animal is. A child, you can read their body language, you can look at their face, you can tell a lot about a human, about their nature, their character, their energy level by looking at their body language. It's exactly the same with plants. It's exactly the same with plants. If you think about them as beings, as individuals, when in the morning, are they excited about the day? Are they turgid and erect and strong, or are they like, ugh? Right? I mean, just look at the way that the leaves are standing on the plant. You can tell an amazing amount by just looking at that. The way the leaves are being held. Are they thirsty? Are they full of energy? Are they hot? Whatever it is. So, are new growth tips standing erect? Do honeybees work the flowers vigorously? Pollinators in general. In some cases, you'll see the pollinators will blow right by the cucumbers and the squash, and they'll be working on the white clover. In some cases, they'll be fighting over the cucumbers. There's a connection between the Brix reading of the plant and the potential quality of the fruit and the quality of the pollen in the flower. Right? The bees are looking for high quality pollen, and if your plants are sickly, they don't have as much interest in actually pollinating that flower. So you might not be able to see a low Brix reading directly or a low level of vigor, but they can see it. So if you can watch the bees and how they move, you can get some perspective on what nature sees. Are the plants growing rapidly? Are they sitting there? These are things I think we've generally discussed. What weed families are dominant? We talked about weed families. If it's a deep tap-rooted weed, that's growing everywhere, that's saying something. If it's a broadleaf weed, that's saying something. We talked about that yesterday. How many flowers are setting per bunch? People may have seen that I guess you said you can't grow tomatoes here, but at the bottom of a tomato plant, sometimes you'll have 3 or 4 flowers per cluster. At the top of the plant, you'll have 1 or 2. How many flowers it's putting out, how many fruit are setting, tells you how much vigor the plant has. If it's only putting out 1 or 2 fruit, that means it's low on vigor. If it's putting out 3 or 4 per cluster, it's higher. So we can look at these sort of patterns over time. You can see them shift. You can notice the nuances, and all that goes into your sort of perspective. And these are the kinds of things I would say as part of your Tuesday morning at 7. I got my conductivity meter in one pocket and reflectometer in the other pocket. Those are empirical Western logical number things, but these are all the sort of the sensitive things, and you want to be sort of balancing those so you can integrate a number and a visual cue, and then you get to the point where you can just glance at a field and you can see what's going on once you've developed these techniques. Some time ago we had elders who could taste the soil and say what was wrong, or they could look at the plant and see what was wrong. We have indigenous traditions of all cultural types where people didn't need meters because they had this wisdom. In many cases, those elders have passed. That knowledge we don't have access to, and so we need to basically be rebuilding it, as far as I'm concerned. And this is sort of ways that we can engage that process. So some questions: how thick are the stems? How thick are the calyxes? The calyx is the part that holds the flower that will eventually hold the fruit. If the plant is putting out a thin calyx, it's telling you it's going to have a small fruit. If it's putting out a thick calyx, it tells you it's going to have a big fruit. It'll tell you with these minor cues, if you know where to look, what its reality is, how it's experiencing reality. How thick are the leaves? Sometimes you'll find a nice like a tomato leaf that'll be nice and thick. Sometimes it'll be willowy, just really, really papery, really thin. Like, anybody notice these differences? You've seen these variations. These are all very, very, they're symptomatic of different dynamics, which these following slides will get us into. What color are the leaves, all the variations in color of green, the shininess we talked about yesterday, or the not shininess. What color is the sap? We just talked about that. When you squish the leaf, when you get a drop of juice out, is it watery and light colored? Is it dark, dark green, almost black and mucilaginous? I mean, you can have a tomato leaf that you get a drop of juice out, one of them is watery and one is slimy. It's not that tomato leaves make slimy juice, it's that the health of the plant causes it to be more or less slimy. Spacing between nodes, we talked about the stretching out factor. I talked about the oak trees. You want plants to be more in that broad arching structure, that round structure. If it starts to get leggy, that's a sign something's wrong. How many petals are on each flower? This is like one of those basic things, Linnaeus sort of like how we define which species of plant they are is by the number of petals on the flower, etc. I understand that, but I also know that I've seen tomato flowers that have like 3 dozen petals on them. Anybody ever seen one of those? They call it king flower, apparently. You'll see this sometimes. It'll look more like a sunflower than a tomato flower. It's on a tomato plant. It turns into a tomato, but it's got a bunch of petals on it.
I've noticed and the stem can be like one stem, but it's like this. It looks
What is it?
weird, but it grows fruit.
There are all kinds of nuances that occur in these plants that connect to something that means something. I don't know of any handbook anywhere. I don't know any person who has like the encyclopedic knowledge of it all. I'm just saying, if you have been out growing plants, you've seen all kinds of variations, and it's those subtleties that where you don't need the plant sap analysis, you don't need the meters, you don't need the labs. It's these subtleties of nuance that when we begin to learn them are our cues as to what's going on and what we can do differently. This is the whole section of the course that I feel like I can, confidently say I don't know. Like, I don't know where to direct you. I don't know the answer anywhere. I just know these things are true and they are all connected. And so I'm going to give you a few connection points, like this means this means that kind of a thing, but there's a ton to discern here.
That thing where the stem grows flat, and it does it I've seen it on delphinium, and I've seen it on cucumbers, and all kinds of different stuff. There is no thing, is there something you call it where it's septuplets all squished together, and it grows like that, and then it makes and it just keeps going, but it's like this really freaking weird thing, and it's across all different kinds of plants. And I see that too.
This is why we need more plant whisperers, so that we can actually go and talk to them and say, hey, what's up? This is the actual way to figure this out, is to have enough people who actually are in honest communication with plants, who are actually asking these questions, for them then to, spread that out to the rest of us. That's the real, we could do a bunch of science and maybe figure it out, but who's got the money and the time and the effort? The practical way we're going to figure this out is the way that the indigenous cultures figured it out, is by communicating and sharing. So I welcome that process. I hope I'm inspiring you to feel empowered to engage that process and maybe acknowledge your own faculties that you didn't, perhaps. If I can have succeeded in that, that's a major accomplishment. Yes.
I don't know what you think about this, but there's a lady, Michelle Smallwright.
Michelle Smallwright, Paralandra. Yes.
And she does kinesiology to know where to plant her plants and to find out what's going on with them. And
yes.
So I don't know if you can.
Yes. Paralandra, there's all kinds of teachers and modalities and handbooks and traditions out there if you start to look. That's certainly one of them. Dowsing. It all eventually comes down to the internal perspective, and we've got different teachers who are helping us find that path. As soon as you start looking, there's a bunch of information and all these amazing people. Oh my God! So as soon as you open yourself to it, I think yes, which is a sort of a great one. Yes.
So on the blossoms, Dan, the grasshoppers ate blossoms off of certain plants, and they left them off of other plants. So I'm taking the unhealthier plant was one that they chose to eat the blossoms off of.
The healthier plant was the one they didn't eat the blossoms off of.
They ate the unhealthy.
You were showing me a picture yesterday of your squash plants. They were growing. You had like 4 squash plants growing in a from one spot, and 2 of them had been decimated by grasshoppers, and 2 of them had not been touched. So I think this is a really important point. I keep hearing grasshopper. No one's really pushed back about grasshoppers, but this concept that the grasshoppers will eat anything, and we're poor us. We're out here in Montana. Like that's nothing you can do about it. When the grasshoppers come, you're screwed. I've talked to a few people who've said, like, in my garden, they ate these plants and didn't touch these plants. They ate these. You said they ate this variety, then they ate that variety, then they ate that variety. Like, the whole point about pest and disease resistance and biochemical complexity is, the healthier the plant is, the less digestible it is for these pathogens. And so we've got people in this room who've been talking to me over the past day and a half and said, I've got examples of the grasshoppers being present, eating this plant, not touching that plant.
We have
And-
grasshoppers living in plants, but they did not eat a single, I have not lost a single crop to a grasshopper, and they're everywhere.
Right.
They're in the grasses, and they're in the hedges, and they're there, they like certain places, but we're shaking grasshoppers out of that lettuce to, when you harvest the head lettuce, or,
Yeah.
they end up in the wash sink, but
Yeah.
there's not a damaged leaf in the crop.
Right.
And that's what, and I tell people too, it is quite insulting to tell somebody that the grasshopper is going to only eat something that is lower in a sugar or in quality that it can digest, and that, most people hear that and do not want to continue a conversation with you anymore. I mean, I think people think I am seriously spraying to, prevent the grasshopper when
It doesn't altogether make sense though. Why wouldn't the grasshopper want the higher sugar, more nutritious milk?
Different digestive system.
That's the whole point about the cow yesterday and the bale of hay. Was like, there's certain things that we can't digest because we don't have the function. I like to call these things nature's garbage crew. Nature's coming in and sending her people to take things out that are not fit for reproduction and leaving the things that are fit for reproduction. If the environment is unhealthy, if a certain plant is unhealthy, nature does not want those things to reproduce. Nature wants the things that are unfit to not reproduce and things that are fit to reproduce, and she's got all kinds of ways of accomplishing that objective. It's not about the
It
volume.
has a job to do, and that's not its job.
Its job is to clean out the junk.
Yeah, not eat sugar.
It leaves the good stuff.
So anyway, yes,
So we should welcome them.
I welcome them. Yeah,
Take a risk and go up to,
I consider that I can consider.
go up to the 5,000-10,000 foot, a couple of years ago when the grasshoppers were really running through Montana and eating everybody's grass, pasture. And they spent, I don't know, somebody knows, millions of dollars spraying. Even my brother did it.
Yeah.
If we had this perspective and we knew that, okay, we've got a problem, that's why the grasshoppers are taking everything out. If we spend a couple of $1 million spraying, let's spray boron, and let's put something else in the ground. So that, because we had the same thing in our garden, we had grasshoppers around and they
Yep.
eat a few things, a lot of things they never touch. So I really am starting to get this, what you're saying, and we would, ideally, culturally, if we had a chapter, we'd say, more grassland out there, the grasshoppers aren't eating, that's telling us that we don't have to be scared of it.
that's the beef you should be eating,
Yeah.
is the cows that were eating on that range.
So I know I don't have a quick answer, but at some point we want our counties to know, or if we're gonna spend money on these things, let's spend it so that.
Spend money on digging holes in the sides of the hills to capture the water, so that you can fill the water table, so that there is water in the rangeland, so the plants are healthy, so they have the complex biochemistry, so the grasshoppers can't eat them.
The systems.
If it's what is the underlying limiting factor in the system, which is causing the plants to be weak? If it's a lack of water, or whatever it is, identify a systemic solution to that issue, and that'll solve it for everybody. Spend that money.
An issue like we had in eastern Montana, and you're doing that, and you've been doing that for 50 years. But if you're in a plague type of situation, those grasshoppers have sacrificial grasshoppers that come in and bite that plant and weaken it. And that's probably what was happening in Patty's is, they just weakened those plants until they were all gone. It maybe started with a weaker variety, But I mean, when you look up into the sun and you see silver, because it's the grasshoppers coming from hundreds of miles away in a jet stream.
So-
You can be doing the perfect thing forever.
Having Ground Central for that.
Whoa, it was awful.
John Kemp had
2 years in a
on
row.
one of his podcasts, he had somebody talk about the grasshoppers specifically, their communication in between each other, and how at that elevation, they can sense which
Yes.
field
To drop on.
to drop on, and why they will hit this one and not that one, and
Yep.
because they can eat this one. It's not because the wind blew on there and they didn't have
Yes.
a choice. They are choosing.
Colorado
But
potato
they're
beetles.
there. I mean, they're in there. I
Yeah.
mean, it's
So-
no different than the flea beetles.
And as long as
seeing
we
the
are
yellow.
growing crops to feed them, they're going to populate. But if we have less feed stock for them, their life cycle changes.
What's that thing? Okay, so I'm gonna start it just, this is at the end, we're not gonna get to it. This is, what's his name, Callahan. Anybody remember in the olden days, we had these things on top of our houses, or some people did?
Yeah.
Yeah, what did you call that? Antenna? All right, now if I was to do this, what would you call that?
Wow.
I call that, okay, it's supposed to be a leaf, yeah. Ever seen a leaf? Right, this structure? So, what are those things that insects have, like highly developed on their heads? Yeah. Everybody looked at the nose of an insect. Do they have like a well-developed nostril?
No.
No. All right, any heard about this thing called pheromones?
Yes.
Right, okay, so the story is the female, whatever insect is flying through the night sky and she's emitting these pheromones and the male insect smells her from a mile away or 2 miles away and, they get to go out. Anybody heard the story about pheromones? Yeah, okay. So, just from a practical standpoint, how much pheromone would an insect have to emit to have a field of it strong enough to be 2 miles wide or 4 miles wide that a male insect with no nose could smell her?
1 part per million.
How much? From a practical standpoint, does it seem efficient for a female insect to emit an aroma that is, which is a complex compound, where it takes a lot of energy to build, so much aroma to have a 2 mile wide field that's so strong that that a male with a poorly developed nose can smell her? Like, this is the story we're taught about how insects find each other, right? This is the story we're taught at the university, the pheromone, the nose thing. Right, so Phil Callahan was an entomologist. The University of Florida is where he finished his career. Interestingly, all of his work, he died in the 90s, is still classified by the US military, as in you can't see it, unreadable. So entomologist, someone who studies insects, classified by the US military. Just data points, you can look it up. Wrote a couple books after he retired. He said, I'm not able to show you my data, but I can present you some thought experiments, because I'm allowed to do that. And so here's one. Take the female insect, put her in one room, put the male insect in another room, have no air going from one to the other, and see if, like, the male decides to hang out on the wall closest to her or not. And lo and behold, he does. So it's not his nose that he's smelling her with. If you understand the physics dynamics of a pheromone is a compound, right? We talked about copper vibrates at a certain frequency and zinc vibrates at a certain frequency. Well, guess what? A pheromone is a compound and it vibrates at a certain frequency. Guess what frequency the male insect's antennae are tuned to? The frequency of the vibration of that pheromone. This is Phil Callahan's work, is he says, it's like 88.5. You're driving along, you listen to 88.5 on the radio, you head in the wrong direction away from where the tower is, and it starts to get staticky, right? If you want to get good signal, you got to turn around and go this way. So for the male insect, it's like it's an antenna, and she's leaving pheromones in the atmosphere. Yes, it's entirely true that she's emitting pheromone, but it's not true that he's smelling her, right? He's hearing her. He's tuning into her vibration, the vibration of that pheromone. That's how he's tracking her down. This is Phil Callahan's work. But when it comes to plants and pest pressure and disease pressure, this is one of those things that I always couldn't figure out when I was a kid because we were certified organic and we always followed the rules and, rotated our crops. And we had fields on both sides of the road and we'd grow our potatoes over here this year and we'd plant them there next year. And damn if, they're 2 inches up out of the ground and all the potato bugs and all the property are sitting on the potato plants that just came out of the ground. Anybody ever seen this happen? Okay. They're not just randomly around the farm, they're all on the damn potato plants that you didn't know what the potato bugs were, and now we know where they are. And so what, as I understand it, Phil Callahan said was, this antenna, this leaf is vibrating, right? Everything is vibrating. We understand everything vibrates. And a potato leaf full of amino acids is vibrating at the frequency of a potato leaf full of amino acids. A potato leaf that's full of protein is vibrating at the frequency of a potato leaf full of protein. Those are different vibrations. And guess which one the potato bugs are tuned to? The one that their kids can eat. It's like, he said, it's like neon light and static, right? They're flying around, there's light, there's a neon light over there. They're just like, they're tuning into that frequency. That's what their antennae are doing. They're literally tuning into the frequency of the potato leaf full of the thing that their babies can eat. And that's where they all land, and then they find each other, and then they mate, and then they lay their eggs. And so if you've got a potato leaf that's full of protein, they can't see it. They literally can't see it. It's off their radar. And if they do randomly find it and lay their eggs there, when their eggs hatch, their babies get indigestion, bloat, and die. Right? They literally can't digest the leaf because they don't have the gut function. So this is the storyline. This is the paradigm. There is the data there to verify this. We've got people in this room who say, "Here's my squash plants decimated by the grasshoppers. Here's my potato plant, my squash plants growing right here untouched." It's not the presence of the grasshopper that determines whether the plant's going to get eaten. It's the digestibility of the plant. And so, yes, to the point about they're flying along, their antennae are tuned to what's food and what's not, and they fly over this and they don't fly over that. So it's a very uncomfortable conversation for people, right? The first thing I had to acknowledge as a farmer was that I was, killing insects, killing disease to harvest crops to sell to people, which was unfit for people to eat, right? For many decades, I grew food that was not food for humans, was food for insects and fungus. And with great pride, I put it on the shelves, I sold it at the farmer's market, and I kept my nose elevated because I was superior, right? The first thing I had to come to terms with was, I wasn't that good of a farmer. And most of us aren't, so, you're in good company. But this is the reality. Nature's talking to us whether we like it or not. I don't want to be too aggressive about the point, but it is, to your point, if people don't want to hear, don't waste your breath. Right? There's no benefit in causing adversity and creating a dynamic of superiority and everything else. That's not going to help anybody. It's not going to help anybody. But the first thing you do when you come across something really exciting is you want to tell people. But you kind of sound like an evangelist, right? You come across like a bit of a, I have the answers, I'm right, you don't, you're wrong. Call it an evangelical Christian, call it a whatever, right? It's got that vibe to it. So it's a stage of the process of, it's genuine excitement. Maybe it's a little bit of ego, but my experience now is, if people want to talk, let's talk. If they don't want to talk, I'm not going to waste my breath because it doesn't really benefit. You don't really get very far. You get negative sometimes. Anyway, so yes, to the point of grasshoppers, but I want to move along here. Stem size generally is bigger is better. So a thicker stem, you don't want a willowy stem, you want a broad stem on a big trunk. Stem strength, stems should bend without breaking. If you've ever walked through a zucchini patch and you look at the leaves the wrong way, they pop off. Right? That's not what you want, right? That's a bad thing. If your tomato edges, the tendrils pop, really crack off really easily, that's not what you want. You want things to have to be able to bend. They want that flexibility. Stem hairs, you want your plants to be as hairy as possible. If you've ever seen, a tomato plant that's fuzzy, that's almost like you're afraid you're going to get, going to prick you like a raspberry or something, that's good. If you have a tomato with no hairs, less good. Those are antennae, which is symptomological of a overall better function. Eggplants will do this thing. Sometimes you'll get a thorn in the middle of an eggplant leaf, like a 3D thorn you can draw blood on. Success. Healthy eggplant, right? The more thorns, the more fuzz. Not everything's gonna have fuzz. You don't usually see fuzz on a broccoli, so they don't do that. But some crops will do more or less, and those are generally what you're looking for. Solid stems in a grain or a brassica, you should have pith in the stem of an oat or a wheat, right? It should not be hollow. You should not be able to blow air through it. It should be full of pith. In most cases, it's not. Alfalfa, right? Alfalfa should not have hollow stems. It should have solid stems. Broccoli. You sometimes at the grocery store, you can see a head of broccoli that's got a little hollow in the middle of it. That's not what you're looking for. Stem shape. Generally, you want a round stem, not an oblong or ovoid shaped stem on a broccoli. Sometimes you'll get like a more of an oval shape. You want the round shape, right? And you can see it in the broccoli. You can see down here it was oval, and then up here it's round. Like you can read the history of the season in the plant, right? If you walk into a farm and this time of year and you see the bed of broccoli plants or kale plants or whatever, and you can see, or maybe like Brussels sprouts is a good example. There's nobody screwed with them probably, and you can see the bottom leaves are yellow, then the middle leaves are bug eaten, and the top leaves are green. You can look back into the season. You can say this is when it was cold, this is when it was droughty, and this is when the environment was a little bit better. The plant literally will put out different leaves that have different things. They'll be susceptible to different things. Some of the leaves get eaten by insects. Some of them don't get eaten. It's not like the whole plant will automatically get eaten. It's like what it was experiencing and what it was able to build into its leaves determined whether that part was susceptible or not. Anybody ever seen that? Ever looked across a bed and you can just, I don't know, it's, when you get to that zone, you're like, oh my God, I can see the pattern. Every single plant in this whole bed, you can see like these leaves are this color, these leaves are this color, these leaves are that color. You can absolutely read the season. It's totally cool when you get to that point, but it's just about stepping back. Internode points, we talked about that. You want stockier plants. Leaf thickness, thicker is better. So here we are in the middle of page 3, sort of the third slide, general parameters, leaf thickness. So I'm starting to go into the connection to different minerals and mineral deficiencies or imbalances. Leaf thickness, F, E, M, G, and K are associated with leaf thickness. So that means iron, magnesium, and potassium, for those who don't know the chemistry. So what does that mean? That means when you see that the leaves were thick at the bottom of the plant, but now they're starting to get a little bit willowy or thin, then you can experiment. You can take some iron sulfate, some magnesium sulfate, some potassium sulfate. These are all things that you can purchase. They're soluble. You can dissolve them in water. You can make a supersaturated solution, and then you can spray some on this plant, spray some on that plant, and spray some on that plant, and see in 2 days if the leaves become thicker or not. Experiment. Oh, where I sprayed the magnesium sulfate is where the leaves got thicker. Great. So we got a magnesium deficiency. Take care of some salts.
New leaves?
Yeah, exactly.
That they would come in thicker.
Precisely. Yeah, the old ones aren't going to change, but the new ones, yeah, exactly. So you want to watch this over time. Like, I'm seeing this imbalance. I'm going to try to counteract with something. It's obviously much easier if you just talk to the plant and ask them what they want. But if you can't do that, then you can experiment in this logical kind of a way. I've got a friend who is one of these plant whisperers and thinks she's crazy or has thought she's crazy. And, finally I got out of her after knowing her for 5 years that actually the plants were talking to her. And now every now and then she calls me up, and I think, one of those conversations was, I was, walking through the eggplant today, and they said they wanted lemonade. Like, what kind of lemonade should I give them? I'm like, did I tell you they wanted lemonade, or did they tell you they wanted lemonade? Well, they told me. Well, why are you asking me? Go ask them. Why do they want lemonade? I don't know. They told you they want lemonade. Talk to them. Ask them what kind of lemonade they want. I have no idea what's going on, but I know that you're getting this communication, and so go for it. I think we had another one. She had these root borers in the onions, and she was like, they told me they wanted parsley. They showed me parsley. They showed me parsley planted, like interplanted with parsley. I'm like, why would they want that? I'm like, I don't know, but I would say do it. And we were teaching the course at their farm, her husband's farm, and a month and a half later, we were out walking through the onion patch, and you could see wherever there was a parsley, all the onions around it were green, and then the ones in the middle were yellow and dead, and then there was more green ones. You could see it was like a checkerboard pattern. Wherever she put the parsley in, the onions were looking good. And she's like, well, it didn't work. I'm like, it did work, you just didn't put enough parsley in. If you put parsley closer, then you would have built the field strength where they all would have stayed green. So the polycultures, how these things work together, there's so many nuances here. Like, I'm gonna give you like the logical, rational number, element thing, but that's really just like the first level of this. The real level is to get that feedback loop. So yeah, how to make a supersaturated solution, how to make a foliar spray. I'll just use this example right here. I said you can take your iron sulfate and magnesium sulfate and you can make a foliar spray out of it. So what would you do? You take, maybe it's an example is salt. If you take salt and you put it into a cup of water and you stir it up and it dissolves, and then you can put more salt and stir it up and it dissolves. And then finally you put enough salt in that it doesn't dissolve, it's just on the bottom. Right? That's a supersaturated solution. That means that liquid is holding as much salt as it can hold. So that's your concentrate. Remember I said always add a carbon source to any salt to buffer a salt. So you would add some humates to this, but then you've got your buffered, potassium, your liquid potassium material. And the rules for foliar sprays are pretty simple. 2% solution. So that means a quarter cup per gallon. So if you're gonna make a 1 gallon, a foliar spray, a tank, like it's a 1 gallon, then you would take a quarter cup of this supersaturated solution and add it to the water. There's your potassium foliar spray. So you take your potassium sulfate, put it in until it stops dissolving, add some humates, and then a quarter cup of that goes into a gallon of water, and you've got your, experimental potassium foliar spray. There's a couple of the rules for foliar sprays I'll tell you right now because we're not going to get to them. The foliar spray section at the end of this handout, and that is you apply foliar sprays when the birds are singing, which hopefully you still have birds around. It's been remarkable in the last couple of years how few birds I hear these days. It's kind of deeply concerning. Like the climate, I'm not so worried about. The politics, the economics, I'm not so worried about. The lack of birds, that one actually makes me feel a little bit worried. But whatever, when birds would sing, or the few of them that are still left do sing, which is dawn and dusk, right? That's when the birds sing. That's when is the appropriate time to apply foliar sprays, before the sun rises or at dusk. And so why do you do that? There's a couple reasons. One is that the stomata are more open. The practical reason is that you are not experiencing a beating down sun, right? If you're taking a soluble salt and spraying it onto a leaf surface with water, and then the water is evaporating, you're basically putting salt on the leaf surface and you're gonna burn it. So the thing from my mind is, most efficiently, or most reasonably is like 7 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock at night. Like dusk time is when I would be going out to do a foliar spray. If you're up at 5 or 4:30 when the cacophony is out there and you wanna go out there and do your foliar spray, awesome. Personally, I don't feel like doing a foliar spray at that hour. My mother on her farm, the crew comes at 7 and then they have chores to do, and by 8 o'clock they're ready to do stuff in the field, and so they go out and do foliar sprays at 8 o'clock. Well, if the sun's up and it's a hot day, then you're gonna burn the leaf, which happens on a regular basis. Is the leaves get burned, so she's going through the process of applying all these wonderful foliar sprays, the high-end good stuff, blah, 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 blah. But how you do it, when you do it, can be destructive just as much as it can be beneficial. So this is a really important point I want to just convey. Foliar sprays potentially are very, very powerful, beneficial or detrimental, right? Either way. They can be either way, and the nuance of when you do it is a big piece of the puzzle.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Just, I apply foliar in the evening.
Yeah.
And I've read or been informed too, then like rinse the plant off and it's like, but I applied it, like I didn't apply it concentrated. So, and I think, okay, well the sprinklers will hit the outside stuff in the morning, but like nothing's gonna rinse it off things inside the tunnel.
I would not say rinse it off.
Yeah, okay.
The whole principle of putting the foliar spray onto the leaf
Yeah.
is for the microbes in the leaf to digest it and feed it to the plant.
Yeah.
And you want to have that window of time when it's there on the leaf surface for them to access it and digest it.
And if it was maybe more concentrated or something, like.
You shouldn't do it
It
concentrated.
shouldn't be that concentrated, but
Yeah, if you do that,
I have been leaving.
the quarter cup per gallon, the 2% solution,
Yeah.
that's your recipe for anything. It won't be too concentrated if you do it that way. If you do it too concentrated, you can burn the leaf,
Yeah,
but then you defeat the purpose by washing it off.
yeah.
So, that's stupid. I've seen amazing things happen with foliar sprays. In the evening, like the tomatoes, I don't usually get around to doing any of the stuff I'm talking to you about. Like, I'm too lazy. Like, I just set the system up and it pretty much takes care of itself. But like, you get to the end of the year and the tomatoes are starting to look a little bit peaked and starting to get cold at night, and I'm like, all right, I should get the foliar sprayer out and do a foliar spray and do a foliar spray. And damn it, if like 2 days later, there's not 6 inches of new growth, which is totally dark green, on stems that have yellow leaves with new flowers. Like, I've seen things happen with foliar sprays, and it just blow my mind. Like, how is it at all possible that such a small amount of material can have such a powerful effect on the physical plane? And it's really when you hit those things that are not present, the cobalt or the molybdenum or whatever it is, like, it doesn't take much of those things in the appropriate environment to just see powerfully positive effects in the plant. So this is one of those cheats, like the little fertilizer, like a foliar spray, a general one-size-fits-all kind of foliar spray that you can either spray in a leaf or you can water into the soil to maintain conductivity. That's the garden kit that you got. Is like, it's got the inoculant, it's got the dry blend, it's got the liquid that you can use on the leaf or in the soil. And it really does make it like easier to look like you're a good farmer, right? If you just keep your plants regularly fed. Yeah.
So there's gonna be so many controls in this theoretical question that it's gonna be probably hard to answer. So I'm just gonna go for the Taj Mahal situation here. We've got ruminants, and they're eating really nice biodiverse grass.
Yep.
And forage, and they're just really having a great time.
Yeah.
And then you are not striving for organic certification. And let's say you take that, the byproduct, well, I don't know why I'm at a loss for words, but the poop.
Yeah.
There we go. I'm gonna say it, poop.
Oh my God.
Poop.
Is everyone okay with that? You just crossed a line.
Okay. I don't know. I'm ready for
Just violated the social ethic here. Poop. Oh no. It's like fart in a minute. No.
And let's say you use that to increase the microbial activity and favorable inputs for your crop. How does that compare to these other inputs that are sort of more like a uniform multivitamin for the ground?
I mean, there's so many things that you can use that are naturally occurring to feed your plants with. Weed teas. I mean, like, anybody ever made a weed tea? Ridiculous, right? You're out there, you're pulling up the pigweed, or maybe you're pruning the tomatoes, which is only because you can't put them too close together. But take those tomato prunings, stick them in a 5-gallon bucket, put some water in it, let it sit for 2 days, and just water one row of tomatoes with that and not the next row, and just see what happens. It's stupid how much energy the plants can get from something that is totally free and right there. Like, there's all these plants that have great vigor and vitality. People talk about kelp and things like that. I'm not sure if you have any of those viney invasive weeds around here. We've got them where I live. Like, they're quote unquote invasive, but they're just so vibrant. Like, cut them, get a 55-gallon drum, stick them in there, fill it with water for a couple of days, let it sit, get a little fermentation, and then start watering your plants with it. Yes, manure teas. There are so many things that you can use that are naturally occurring that you don't need to be bringing stuff in from off-site. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
I just wanted to ask that question because in my mind, I'm trying to think about, what do we have access to easily without having to reinvent the wheel?
In India, they use cow manure and cow urine with profound subtlety and sophistication for fertility purposes. I mean, they've got thousands of years of tradition of using those materials to great benefit for the plants. So there's, depending on which country you're looking at, culturally, a lot of the stuff has been determined and understood. So
Typically aerobic though.
I don't know the nuances.
It depends on what they're eating.
I don't know the
and what
nuances.
stage decomposition is.
I mean, I know that the biodynamic people use manure tea, which I don't think is anaerobic, which is aerobic. I mean, I'm not, I hope I'm really clear. I don't have any particular answers. Hopefully, I'm just saying like, there's a bunch of opportunity in this direction or that direction. Look into it and experiment. So I would say go for it. I'm not afraid of a little bit of, what do they call it? E. coli,
Yeah.
right? I mean, a healthy leaf surface, you can put manure on a leaf surface of a healthy plant, and the microbes on the leaf surface will kill the E. coli, right? I mean, we should not be afraid. You should be afraid of E. coli when you irradiate the leaf. When you kill the microbes on the leaf surface, right, that's when the E. coli becomes an issue. Minor point, but, I mean, I haven't gone on this rant yet, I'm running out of time, but this one's coming to me. Anybody ever been to like a hospital and like, at least in the olden days, I mean, I guess that they do have it now too, like in the elevator, there'd be like a little antibacterial soap,
Yeah.
right? Kills 99.9% of microbes. So you're supposed to wash your hands with it, right? Anybody know where staph infections are systemic?
In hospitals.
Right, okay, so just let me walk you through this one, right? So we got an old growth forest. We got a beautiful old growth forest. We're in the Pacific Northwest, gorgeous, amazing, tall trees, all kinds of polyculture, blah, blah, blah. How many invasive species are present, and to what degree are they dominant in that old growth forest, just conceptually? Right? I would say almost none.
All
Right.
Yeah, the other way, sorry.
If there are any invasive species, which in most cases they're not, in that polyculture mature ecosystem, they're certainly not dominant. Now, if you were to take a square mile of that beautiful old growth forest and clear cut it, what's your likelihood of those invasive species being present in that clear cut versus the not clear cut, right? We're gonna say probably that's where they're more likely to be dominant. So you should have 150 different species of people living on your hand at any point in time, and 50 different ones in your armpit, and a whole bunch of other ones on your arm, right? This whole concept of we're animals and they're bacteria and we're good and they're bad. What did I say was the percentage of cells in your body that are human? Like less than 10% of the cells in your body. That means 90+% of the cells in your body are not human. That means you have evolved for millions of years with a profound symbiotic ecosystem in relationship with these microbes. So we'll call that an old growth forest. We'll call your gut flora, your skin flora, your liver flora, your mouth flora. We're gonna call that your old growth forest, complex polyculture ecosystem. Now, if you go into one of those dynamics and you clear cut that old growth, right? So like you go into the hospital, you use the antibacterial soap, you engage in genocide, right? Billions of organisms are now dead. Polyculture, symbiotic ecosystem, destroyed. And you go into an environment where there are these pathogens, where we have the invasive species present. Like, you've done the best possible thing to support the spread of the invasive species, right? Like, the act of using the antimicrobial soap is the act of creating the dynamic where that pathogen is most likely to spread. So, I just have to get that off my chest.
Hospitals are where we go to die.
It's a whole long conversation, but this concept of germs bad, like, which was actively propagated in the past couple of years, is so profoundly counterproductive and perverse, it's not funny, right? There's children now that think it's good to use antibacterial soap. Their minds have been perverted for their lifetimes, right? There's some serious re-education necessary because we've just like deeply instilled this concept of fear of bacteria, of like, that's a serious trauma on the system. So I'm just gonna say that for the record. All right, where did I leave off? Leaf shape. Shorter and wider leaves correlate with a higher productive potential and stockier plants. So if you've seen a tomato plant that's got a big, broad, like it looks like a glove, blocky leaf at the bottom of the plant, and you've seen these little skinny little leaves on top of the plant. Anybody ever seen that? The leaves start big and they end up skinny. Not a sign of good health. You want that big blocky leaf to stay going through the entire plant. So every new leaf that's coming out, it shows you where the plant's at. So leaf density, plants highly loaded with leaves have a higher productive capacity. Think about the fact that the leaf is the solar panel collecting the sunlight to make the sugar. Like people talk about pruning leaves, pruning plants. Like in my perspective, the plant's putting out the leaves to make the sugar to feed the microbes to then feed the plant. And so pruning the plant in general is a very bad idea. Like it's only making it, like inhibiting its ability to feed itself. Oh, I want to make it go to start flowering and fruiting, so I'm going to take some leaves off. You might cause it to feel stressed out like it's going to get killed, and so it's going to have a few fruit before it dies. But that's not the best kind of attitude you want to be engaging with the plant, way to engage the plant. We talked about leaf sap color, magnesium, boron, and potassium, M, B, and K. Number of flowers per cluster, manganese is a limiting factor in that flowering potential. So interestingly, with a human reproductive capacity as well, many people who suffer from the inability to get pregnant, poor sperm count, things like that, actually correlates with manganese, very interestingly. Manganese is one of those elements that's tied up by glyphosate. So if you've got Roundup in your food, which is tied up, the way Roundup kills, the weeds is by tying up manganese, I think it's copper, zinc, and cobalt. Manganese, copper, zinc, and cobalt, all critical enzymes, enzyme cofactors and elements. You tie those up, you make them unavailable, and plants die. So you need them for your system function, the microbes need them, but if they're not in your food, then reproduction, which is a factor that's manganese is used for, becomes much more difficult. So in many cases, if you've got plants that are growing vigorously, but not fruiting, then an application of manganese can support that fruiting process. Very, very simple. Manganese sulfate, solubilize it in water, run it through the drip line, irrigation line, foliar spray. Very powerfully move a plant towards that reproductive function if that's a limiting factor. In many cases, you've got a big, strong plant not fruiting very much. Add some manganese, and you'll see a ton of fruit coming out. That means your manganese was your limiting factor. Your soil test said you had 5 parts per million. I'm telling you, you need 80 parts per million. Like, your plant was growing well, it wasn't fruiting because manganese was a limiting factor.
Are you adjusting the pH?
Am I? I didn't say it before, but I don't give a rat's rear end for pH. As I understand it, I should have talked about it in the soil testing section, but the concept of pH basically has to do with available hydrogens, and so I'm not sure if I can get into it fully right now. I don't have time to. But basically, microbes will raise or lower pH to solubilize what they want. They have that functional capacity. So the concept of pH is like my soil is at pH of 6, is assuming that there's no life in there. It's a static. If it's a totally chemistry set dynamic, yes, certain things are only soluble at 6, only soluble at 6.4 or whatever. But the concept that your soil has a static pH requires that would only be true if there was no life in your soil, right? In an abiotic environment, that's true, that it's a stable thing. But what microbes do is they exude acids and bases to raise and lower the pH in the exact spot where those nutrients are that the plant wants. The plant can't do that so well, but the microbes do it really well. So if you put a pH meter in one spot in the soil and just leave it exactly there for 24 hours, it can go from 5 to 7 to 5 over a 24-hour period. So the reality is pH goes up and down all day long in any given spot.
I understand it happens in the root zone, but as a foliar application, you're saying it also happens on the leaf surface.
The microbes are covering the leaf
Adjust.
just as much as they're covering the root. Yeah, and they're actually inside the leaf too. So if there's a fungal attack, a healthy plant has leaf layer, fungal layer, leaf layer, bacterial layer. There's the microbes are actually inside the leaf, and they are the active defense mechanism that really is keeping the fungal pathogen at bay. It's really sophisticated how plants work. And we have them like this, we just don't have, in general, our concepts are quite rudimentary of what's going on.
We have a situation where our soils are typically 8 or above pH.
Yep.
We also have water that's typically 8 or above pH.
Mhm.
And I think, at least from what I've learned, that modifying that to bring the pH down for foliar spray
Yes,
is more absorbable for most kinds of nutrients or whatever you're applying for foliar application.
in general, we talked yesterday about the buffering capacity of liquid humates or other carbon sources, biochar, things like that. Yes, and we definitely want to be buffering if possible. Yeah. Mhm.
So you've been talking about holding ponds and so forth, and I'm curious about additives to holding ponds before irrigation application or so forth. Is that something that you would see benefit in adding humates to, for example, or certain inputs? Or is that simply just to increase the water table and what you talked about yesterday?
I was thinking about it as a way to increase the water table and sort of get that water cycle going again. I don't have much experience out here in this sort of dynamic, so when it comes to these kinds of pH issues or things like that, I can't say I know. I would say if you're going to be adding humates to the water, I would do it as it's going into the irrigation line. I wouldn't do it in the pond.
A healthy pond with good vegetation will take care of itself.
With good life, if you've got life in the pond, if you got frogs and lily pads and things like that, yeah, life will take care of modulating it, balancing it, for sure. As opposed to deep well water, which in many cases has, heavy levels of metals or other elements in it. Okay, moving on to page 4. Okay, biochemical process of plant nutrition. This is the one where it lays out the boron role. I can read this whole thing out loud to you, but it's, boron activates silicon, which carries all of the nutrients, starting with calcium, which bonds nitrogen to form amino acids. DNA promotes cell division. Amino acids form protein and tag trace minerals, especially magnesium, to form chlorophyll. This transfers energy via phosphorus to go to carbon to form sugars, which goes where potassium carries it. If you want to understand the biochemistry of all this stuff, scientists have done it. It's really complicated. It's not fun or easy to memorize. But one important point is it all starts with boron. Boron activates silicon, which carries all other nutrients, starting with calcium. Just go back to the boron part. Boron is a really important point. I made this yesterday. Again, in most cases, I would recommend this is something you could consider adding and experience beneficial impact. All right, so these next few slides talk about the specific symptomology of a calcium deficiency versus a potassium deficiency, what it looks like, how to solve it. Often calcium shortages show up in tandem with other shortages, most commonly boron and silicon. The previous slide can give you that justification. The calcium only moves once the boron and silicon are functioning. So you can have plenty of calcium in the soil and not enough calcium in the plant, and that's because of your boron and silicon issues. Boron, we talked about borax, there's boric acid, there's solubor. Silicon you can get in rock dust, right? Rock dust, your basalts, your granites, things like that have very high levels of silicon in them. Somebody was talking about equisetum horsetail, horsetail. Rock dust?
Oh, okay.
That $2 a ton stuff, yeah, broadcast it out, put it in your compost pile. Like silicon is a really important thing. We don't talk about it. Strong cell walls, fungal resistance, all has to do with silicon. You were talking about horsetail being an issue in your garden. Anybody who knows what horsetail is, the biodynamic people do, and it's a plant, an ancient plant that if you know what it is and you have some, you can harvest it, you can dry it, you can make a tea out of it. A very, very, very powerful, bioavailable, silicon material for a crop. So that's something you can harvest locally, and like I said, cut it, stick it in a bucket, let it sit for a couple days in the water, put it in a foliar spray, water it into your garden.
I have it in a bucket. And my hope was that if I water it back onto itself, it would leave.
It would leave.
Yeah.
Experiment.
Yeah.
Like what do they do with the biodynamic people? They take the mice. You find some mice in the garden and you kill them and you burn them, you ash them, and then you spread the ashes around the edge of the garden to get the mice to not come back. But, you know, Michelle Small-Wright or somebody parenting would say, talk to the mice and say, hey guys, do you mind? You can have this corner, and then I get everything else. And if you have that, you talk to them and figure it out that way. So there's all kinds of ways to go at it. Stem and leaf strength and ability to flex and bend is correlated with calcium. So when something is brittle and it breaks easily, it's a functional calcium deficiency. It may not be a lack of calcium in the soil. It may be that boron silicon thing, but the brittle breaking is a calcium deficiency symptom. Strong cell walls, fungal resistance, and round stems. So when the stems get oblong, that's a calcium deficiency symptom. Leaves have a wrinkled appearance and may defoliate. Anybody ever seen Swiss chard, that sort of four-foot giant, the classic green Swiss chard? Sometimes it'll have pretty much flat leaves, and sometimes it'll have totally ruffled leaves. Sometimes it's flat, sometimes it's ruffled, sometimes it's flat, sometimes it's ruffled. That ruffle is symptomatic of a calcium deficiency. Corn, remember you have a corn leaf up and down one side of the corn is this little ruffle, that's a calcium deficiency symptom. In many cases, it's actually a boron deficiency. It's a lack of boron which is causing the calcium not to get into the plant. But it is functionally called a calcium deficiency. Adequate calcium correlates with the same leaf size across the plant. We talked about how the bottom leaves of the tomato plant are big, and they get smaller and smaller and smaller. As the leaves get smaller, that's a symptom of, you know, the plant not being able to get the calcium to push to the extremities. Okay, silicon. Vine crops will become resistant to powdery mildew with sufficient silicon. Synergisms with calcium making strong cell walls. Grasses and cucurbits especially need silicon. Okay, yeah, I don't have a lot there, but it's certainly an important piece. Boron facilitates carbohydrate transport down to the roots and nutrients up to the leaves. Insufficient boron will correlate with a stagnant Brix reading, not fluctuating during the day. So I talked about boron being an important thing. One way to see if you have a boron deficiency is to take a refractometer Brix reading at 7 o'clock in the morning and one at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You would expect to see your Brix reading in the morning be lower than the one in the afternoon. If they stay the same, what does it say here? Boron facilitates carbohydrate transport down to the roots and nutrients up to the leaves. So the plant in the afternoon is making a lot of sugar. You would expect that a lot of that would be dropping down into the roots during the night, and so you have a lower Brix reading, less stuff in the leaf in the morning than you have in mid-afternoon. If you don't have enough boron, that process is broken, and it's basically like constipation. Basically, it's stuck there. Think about that from a practical standpoint. If the plant's making lots of sugar in its leaves and it's not getting down into the roots, then what's happening? The microbes aren't being fed. The plant has green leaves, it's making sugar, but it's not getting down into the roots. Like, boron is foundational in so many things not working, right? It's like, yeah, maybe that was what they were talking about with like the plants stop exuding. It's a boron deficiency. Those guys don't like minerals. They don't like minerals. They're like, no, we don't do minerals, blah, 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 blah. We've all got our blind spots. We've all got our blind spots. Little back channel conversation in front of everybody else. Don't know what we're talking about, but yes. All right. Adequate levels of calcium in the soil in the bottom of the plant, but not in the top of the plant, correlate to boron deficiency. So if that plant leaf is big at the bottom and not big at the top, but you have good calcium levels in the soil, it was the boron which was inhibiting it from getting there. That's your issue.
Say that again? The first part?
If you have big leaves at the bottom of the plant, like think about a cucumber or like a tomato plant. Like, you know, cucumbers or summer squash, zucchini, they got big old leaves like the first leaves are massive, but then as it grows, as it gets longer, the ones at the end are smaller. Ever seen that with a summer squash or zucchini? The leaves get a lot smaller. Cucumbers do the same thing, right? Like, as the leaves get smaller at the end of the plant, that means the calcium is not getting there. What the boron does is it facilitates the calcium flow. And so,
Not necessarily not enough calcium, but definitely not enough boron.
yes, exactly. If your soil test says you got enough calcium in the soil, which apparently you guys have plenty of calcium in your soil, but you're not seeing it in the extremities of the plant, the boron helps it move to the extremities.
Dan, can we put boron down in the fall to make? the-
Absolutely.
For the next
Can you-
round?
Can you overdo it?
Yes.
Yes.
Is there anything that ties up boron?
I guess we have that.
Like,
Well, I said it's an anion, it likes to leach. The guy who was here yesterday said it's, can be toxic, which is totally true, you can burn your plants with it. So don't put a whole bunch down right before you put your seeds down. Ideally, all these minerals that we're talking about to address deficiencies are put down in the fall. You put down in the fall and you've got the winter for them to digest into the system. Sorry?
I think like when I was looking at my soil report and boron was at a really healthy, good level. But I witnessed exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I think, well, if it's there, and it's showing signs of a boron deficiency, like is something preventing that boron from being taken up?
Lack of biological function, I don't know. I mean, can you supplement with it? Can you take your boric acid or your soluble and dissolve it in water and put some humates in there and make a foliar spray out of it? Or water it into the soil?
Which I haven't done, so, yeah.
I mean, hopefully I'm leaving you with,
Different delivery system.
tricks to experiment with.
You may have gone over this, so forgive me, but something I was just reading about with boron is that we do a little bit better in the West because we're drier
Yeah.
in terms of our
It doesn't
boron
leach.
levels.
Yes.
Yeah, but I think maybe but it may be that the offset of that is that because we're drier, we're not getting as much like communication between microbes.
Or levels of
Or
microbes.
levels of microbes.
So the
it's
plant
like,
doesn't have access to it.
yeah, so there's more boron like you might find those right
Mhm.
levels of boron,
You're more likely to have 1 part per
Here.
million, we're likely to have 1/10 of a part per million.
yeah.
But if you don't have the water, you don't have the microbes, and the microbes can't access it. So it's actually a water deficiency is your issue.
Or your drip is leaching it out.
It takes a lot of drip to get water to go down. You gotta irrigate almost constantly to get to get it moving downward. So, the issue here is if you don't water enough, the evaporation is your issue. Anyway, again, like the soil test section, this is very much of a linear, just this element, and it's never that simple. There's always other dynamics here. I wanna leave you with some of these concepts and hopefully not get too attached to, like, I'm gonna do this and that's gonna solve my problems. Caveats all over the place. Moving forward, sulfur, old leaves turn yellow and don't drop, I'll just say that one. Anybody ever seen the bottom leaves on a broccoli plant that turn yellow and sit there, or the bottom leaves on a onion or garlic or leek turn yellow and sit there? Right, the brassicosins, those compounds that smell like broccoli, the alliums, what makes your eyes burn, those are sulfur compounds. Those are 2 families of plants that use a lot of sulfur, and that classic symptom of the bottom leaves turning yellow and staying there is a symptom of the plant experiencing a sulfur deficiency. So that's a classic symptom right there of sulfur. I'm gonna skip over phosphorus and nitrogen. I got some more stuff on potassium. I'm very sensitive to time here. Potassium is a transport element and a catalyst in plant sizing. Potassium deficiency will show up in the leaf or stem or fruit if the size is not there, obvious in the size and shape of fruit. The delicious apple shape shows insufficient potassium. So you know the classic red delicious apple that's like round on top and pinched in the bottom? That's that shape. Well, think about a cucumber. Ever had a cucumber that was like filled out in one end and pinched at the bottom? Summer squash, zucchini do that sometimes. Ever seen a tomato that like a plant will start with like we'll call it an 8-ounce fruit at the bottom of the plant, and then it turns into a 6-ounce fruit, and then turns into a 4-ounce fruit. Top of the plant, they get smaller. Cherry tomatoes are a classic example. They start out like almost as big as a golf ball. They end up like a marble, right? Same plant, size of the fruit is different. Potassium deficiency. When you see those things happening, that's potassium. Also, the bottom leaves turning yellow and then turning brown and falling off on like a tomato plant. That's a classic potassium deficiency symptom. The plant will basically suck the potassium out of its bottom leaves. It'll sacrifice its part of its bodies to feed its baby. We talked about that a little bit yesterday. Potassium, I'm gonna see if I've got it written down here. And thin stems, deficiency, thin stems, thin calyxes, thin leaves, small fruit. a light or yellow band around the outside limb of the leaf. And then, ever see the cucumber leaf? It's like a little, it's like yellow right around the edge. Cucumber,
Like it's about to dry out.
it's yellow all around the edge. That's potassium deficiency, which correlates in many cases with lack of water. So let me see if I've got it written here. In tomatoes, the bottom leaves turning brown. We call it early blight. It's not a disease, it's a potassium deficiency, which is actually a water deficiency. So what happens, potassium is an electrolyte, and when the soil dries out, the potassium that was available becomes unavailable, it locks up. So if you got moisture, you got potassium availability, but you've got many thousands of pounds of potassium in every acre of soil, right? There's no shortage of actual potassium in your soil. That's just, there's a bunch there. The question is, how available is it? So what happens when your soil dries out, if it was good, you had spring rains, you had moisture, there was some potassium availability, when the soil dries out, that potassium locks up. And then even if you do add water again, it takes a good 2-3 months for that availability to increase again. So letting your soil dry out just for 2 days, gives you a potassium deficiency for the next, 1 to 3 months.
We've got that.
Okay.
It's so simple. But when you talk about the microbes shutting down, but which is actually should be more important. You should be more worried about that when the soil dries out. Like, oh, it's just a week. It'll toughen them up, right?
Well, there's something about like letting a plant go through, like not keeping the soil wet all the time.
People say. Don't they say you should actually drink a gallon of water every day? Hydration is one of those massively important things.
Yes, yes.
We're told like, oh, it'll toughen them up.
Yeah,
it's like
we're
leave
taught,
the
like-
leave the kids out,
So for deeper roots, like water longer, less often.
Yeah.
Causing
Tough it out, guilt.
potassium shortage.
Suffering is good for you. Are we mostly Calvinists here? Right? I mean, isn't it?
Only if you have trace minerals and electrolytes on board, otherwise it's useless.
Yeah,
You're just going to pee it out, and that's kind of the whole, this concept.
There's
of
a
what you're
beautiful
talking about.
balance
Is it
here.
available, is it
Yeah.
absorbable?
So, as far as I'm concerned, maintaining a good level of hydration is, in general, a good thing. So, if we can grant that point, then stressing things out with insufficient hydration is not a good thing, on principle. Even though we've got these little, like these little carve-outs, right? We've got these little carve-outs, these stories we tell ourselves, like I believe in science and reductionism and logic and the physical plane, and I also believe in Jesus being able to engage in miracles. Like, which one is it? Do you believe in Jesus in miracles? Which then means everything, is that plausible for everybody, everywhere, constantly? Or do you just believe in the physical plane? But we have this like absolutely fragmented like concept of reality that is obviously flawed, right? So we have to find these points where we just tell ourselves these stories, which all the data points can give us pretty good likelihood is wrong. And just like stop repeating them. It's received wisdom. I mean, don't take my word for anything. Experiment, see what happens. See what the dynamics are. From my perspective, as I understand it, potassium is an electrolyte, right? People heard about that one. When electrolytes, you don't have any water, it's not soluble anymore, it's not bioavailable anymore, it ties up, it readheres to the soil colloid. When the water dries out, the potassium readheres, and then it takes time for it to loosen up and become bioavailable again. And part of that is just the logistics, and part of it is the microbes doing the job of making it bioavailable. When the water is gone, not only does it readhere, but the microbes shut down too. Then they have to reestablish. Yeah.
Well, and I think a simple way to apply what if it is you're talking about conceptually is just our imposition of unnecessary stress and how we think that creates resilience when actually it doesn't. It creates more stress. I think there's a certain amount of stress that is good and sufficient, but finding that fine line, we're not great at as a culture. So I think it's going to take time for us to kind of wrap our minds around how we employ those things
Yeah.
with the activity of agriculture.
And raising children and, you know, maintaining relationships with people and, you know, engaging in the community. Yeah, it's a very interesting, yeah. Okay, potassium, magnesium. What do I want to emphasize here? I don't really want to emphasize. I want to talk to other topics. Okay, middle of page 7, phases of nutritional need. I think I've talked about this before, but basically when the plant's young, it's like a 5-year-old that doesn't need a lot of food to eat. When it's, you know, a growing teenager, it needs more to eat. When it's a pregnant mother, it needs more. Right? Life cycles. If we understand the life cycle in humans, we understand life cycle in animals. It's basically exactly the same life cycle in plants. Right? Birth is germination. Colostrum is inoculation. Flowering is puberty. Right? I mean, it's if you understand these things, you can intuit much more well where the plant's at and what its needs are. Foundationally, the point I want to make here with limited time is that being able to keep a plant so that it's able to eat well through its life cycle is foundational for health. I've used the example of a pregnant teenager and saying if you don't, she's never going to eat, she's probably not going to be in good shape. Even a pregnant adult woman, if she doesn't eat well, it's going to be in bad shape, right? The conductivity thing. Soil conductivity connects to how much food you have to eat. If you have low soil conductivity, you can guarantee that over time you're going to see these symptoms of dysfunction begin to increase and build up. Like you don't ever want to see the yellowing of a leaf. The yellowing of a leaf only happens after the system has been stressed for a while. You want to be able to proactively prevent that from occurring. Right? You don't want that to happen. So, I've got written down here different blossoming and fruit set, fruit fill, you know, boron, calcium, magnesium, sulfur, phosphorus, magnesium, cobalt. I mean, basically a broad spectrum of elements are necessary for good system function. And so having the ability to proactively provide those to a plant, I think is good strategy. So this is where the foliar sprays and the nutrient drenches come in. I'm not saying you need to buy something. Certainly some people do, and that's totally fine. You can make your own. You can make, you know, weed teas. You can do all kinds of things. But just to understand conceptually that plants go through their life cycle, that they need to eat, and if the environmental conditions are such that they're not able to get what they need, they're going to start falling apart. That shouldn't be a complex thought. For me, it was a revelation when it was presented. Like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. How come I never heard that before? And it's so easy. It's so easy. You just get these like nutrient drenches, or you make them, and you get the conductivity meter, and you can see what's going to happen. So yeah, I like to think about cheating, not like breaking the rules cheating, but like it's so easy to be successful that it feels like it's not fair, right? Like it's so easy to be a good farmer. It's so easy to have crops that are so healthy, that are so productive, that have a low cost of production, that you're making good money. It feels like cheating. Like it just feels so easy. For me, growing up on a farm, decades of struggle and stress, like this big shift, like wow, I can make a living. It has to do with this kind of proactive maintenance and management. So, all right, root and top balance, we talked about that. How to discern imbalance, I've got conductivity written down here. I think we already discussed that. Deficient conductivity, I think we talked about that. Bricks, we talked about that. In general, that slide says, you know, once you've seen the yellowing or the purpling or the lack of shiny leaf, the imbalance has already been in place for a while. Like we want to prevent that. So this is here basically the comment about, you know, feeding proactively. I've got a few slides here about a saturated paste test. This is similar to like, well, this is for the soil. This is like a soluble nutrients availability for the soil. Some people are doing these sap tests now, testing leaves to see what's in the plant leaf. There's all kinds of ways that you can dial in the nuances of the specific nutrients. You can spend money sending stuff off to labs. I mean, there's plenty of people out there selling services, selling products. these are possibilities if you're curious to engage. Personally, on my scale, if I'm growing a bunch of different crops on a small amount of space, like every single crop has to be a unique sample. So like this variety of tomatoes has its own dynamic, and that variety of tomatoes has its own dynamic. If I've got 45 varieties of tomatoes, and I have to send each sap analysis, it's $150. You do 45 times 150, and that's once every 2 weeks. That's just a tomato patch. That's not talking about the cucumbers or the summer squash. It's not realistic that I'm going to be engaging in that lab type analysis dynamic. So from a practical standpoint, having your broad spectrum goodie bag on hand to be able to feed your plants with, for me, feels like a lot simpler. If you're operating on scale, if you've got a big cash crop and dialing in the fertility is going to make a big difference on your bottom line, go for it. But understand you have to, these things are appropriate in different scales or inappropriate as well. All right, so that brings us to the simple solutions, which is the point I was making about foliar sprays, nutrient extensions, and things like that. So we have gotten to the point where I like to spend the last hour and a half on topics esoteric and metaphysical, and I'm fairly certain we do not have an hour and a half left. Do we have 5 minutes left, or what time is it? 30 minutes? All right, I was able to move through a number of slides fairly rapidly here afternoon. So half an hour. Whew. I like this. I think there's going to be people coming in here soon, and I think the reality of like just this small group here is not going to be the reality fairly shortly. So as I've said, this presentation has been given numerous times in the past. It is recorded and freely available on YouTube. If you see, Dan Kittredge part 1 through 9, just go to 9. Dan Kittredge part 1 through 8, go to 8 if you want this recorded. It's a little more time. So I'll hit a few points. Yeah, we knew from the beginning that this was a 10-hour course, not a 12-hour course. So that's where we're at. Biology. Assumptions are there's 1.5 million species of soil fungi and 3 million species of soil bacteria. That's an old number. It's probably higher than that right now. The scientists, all the microbiologists and all the continents and all the languages and all the decades have named 3 to 5% of them. Similar to the dark matter and dark energy. The vast majority of the species of life on the soil don't even have names yet. So it's not like we can dial it all in and control and there's some of these companies that are trying to patent microbes and sell them. We got this microbe for drought resistance. Great that those companies are now understanding the role of microbes, but the concept of trying to control and patent and have 1 or 2 or 3, it's so ridiculous, right? It's patently flawed, but that's the paradigm of control. So anyway.
Well, to me, it's like they've said, this is the only one you need to, right.
You're coming from a
Not
paradigm
powdery mildew,
where you need to have
just the one.
IP.
We've identified the
Yeah,
one.
that's
Don't
it.
worry
This is the
about all
answer.
the others.
Silver bullet. Oh my God, finally someone's found the silver bullet. Been waiting for decades and they found the silver bullet. Oh, poof. Oh, what a weight off my shoulders. That was sarcasm for the closer to get it. It's my form of humor. It doesn't always go over, but yeah. So when we're having this conversation with others, when we're maybe feeling inspired about all these things and trying to share it with others, from a perspective of biology, I think there's some foundational points here that if they're not conveyed to begin with or agreed upon to begin with, then the rest of the conversation is not going to go over well. If you are going to be in that evangelical state of passionately trying to talk to other people about this thing, which you don't quite understand, but you know it's really important, first, start off with the green leaves thing. Start off with the green leaves thing. Plants are green because on none of the first 6 days did God invent fertilizer. For the last 300 million years, plants have been feeding themselves by feeding the microbes. It's only when the microbes are functioning well is the plant functioning well. This is a powerful conceptual framework. If you can get that thought through, by hook or by crook, slowly, gently, use the metaphors that I've used, repeat them, make some up of your own. That understanding that plants foundationally have evolved the ability to take care of their own business. And foundationally, it's in symbiosis with microbes that occurs. And then, therefore, it's about how do we create an environment for the microbes to function well. That's what good farming is. That is a powerful base of the conversation. So you can go on to nuances, you can go on to, nutrient density, you can go on to soil carbon, you can go on to all those other things. But I think, this is a piece that's important. So I'll just say that, do with it as you will. But, I have found this to be a great entree into the conversation, is this basic understanding. And then you can go to human gut flora and microbiome, and that people kind of have heard about that, and they understand about the gut flora, right? They understand that we need the microbes to digest our food for us. You can say plants are the same way. These are some powerful pieces. So chemistry, also a very important piece of this puzzle, with enzymes. I haven't gone into my sort of enzyme talk or like rant, so I think maybe now's a good time for it. I think I roughly referred to DNA yesterday, but we have this thing where these different elements, they have different protons and neutrons that we've heard about, and the orbitals, if you really remember, like there's the L orbital and the T orbital and all this kind of stuff. Interestingly, these different elements, like copper, if you look at, actually they measured like one atom of copper, and it's 1.5 angstroms across. It's a certain size, an angstrom is a unit of measure, like a meter. And zinc is 1.6 angstroms across. It's a different size. And calcium, and copper when it bonds, has a octahedral bonding geometry. You ever seen like the 8-sided figures and 4-sided figures and 6-sided figures, like a pyramid and the square and the octagon, right? Each of these elements, when they bond with somebody else, they have certain bonding angles, right? Every compound has this sort of geometry. And we talked about the enzymes yesterday, I think, at the role of these sockets and wrenches to put amino acids together to make proteins or to digest them and take them apart. This is the understanding about the role of the trace elements, the minerals in the ecosystem. I don't know if I said it about chromium yesterday with diabetes, but I use the metaphor of a hoop house to convey this. If you've ever built a hoop house, in my experience, you start off with a pile of metal pipes that is really quite small. Maybe it's 2 feet across and 2 feet tall and 10 feet wide. It's not that much pipe. But then when you get done building it, you've got a structure that's 100 feet long and 30 feet wide and 15, 20 feet tall, right? You got a big structure that was made out of a small amount of pipe. And the thing that you used to put all those pieces of pipe together was a 9/16 socket and wrench and a 1/2 inch, right? Anybody ever built a hoop house? Yeah. You just use the 9/16 on these ones and the 1/2 inch on these ones. So you have these 2 little sockets and wrenches that are used to take this little pile of pipes and turn it into this big structure, right? That's what an enzyme is. An enzyme is a thing that has a unique size and shape based on the element at its core. There's copper-based enzymes and zinc-based enzymes and chromium-based enzymes and vanadium-based enzymes. They're all unique. You got star bits and you got hex bits and you got Phillips head bits and you've got straight head bits and you've got, right, metric and you've got standard. You got all these different things. This is how nature works. Nature has these things that have unique sizes and shapes, and she uses them over and over again. And you don't need many sockets on a farm to get a whole bunch of stuff done. But if you don't have those sockets, vice grips, stripping nuts, it doesn't work very well. It's real hard to get a nut off if you don't have the right size socket. So that's biochemistry, really, in a nutshell, is if you don't have the cobalt and the molybdenum and the boron and the sulfur and all these systems don't function. We're taught about NPK, which is the things you need for the bulking and the volume, but actually for the structure, right, the converting of an amino acid to a protein requires an enzyme. You got plenty of nitrogen in your system because you've added fertilizer, but you've got grasshoppers eating your leaves because you didn't have any minerals, right? Those amino acids weren't complex into protein, and now that, that leaf is susceptible to insect pressure. So I think I talked about this with the DNA yesterday, the human DNA, maybe just obliquely or short, I'll give it a little bit longer. When the Human Genome Project was being performed in the 1990s, and they were identifying all the different pieces of the DNA, they were, and all the enzymes necessary to put those pieces together, they were able to, they identified all the DNA pieces, they identified all the enzymes, and then because we know what the enzymes are made out of, we can identify all the elements. So there's copper-based enzymes and zinc-based enzymes. There's actually 25 different elements that are required to build one strand of human DNA. I'm not saying 5 calciums and 3 potassiums. I'm saying calcium, potassium, phosphorus, sulfur, molybdenum, yttrium, vanadium, chromium. 25 different elements are required to replicate every strand of human DNA. A, point. B, if you were a car and you had a muffler that rusted out, you are engineered to have your muffler taken out and a new muffler put in, right? People know about this? Heard about it? If you're a car and you got brake pads and your brake pads wear out, you're designed to have your brake pads taken out and new brake pads put in. People may have heard about that. You don't have rust out here because you don't have any rain, but you do have brakes. Brake pads that wear out. You have salt on the roads? You don't have salt on the roads. You don't have any rain to make rust anyways, so anyway, sorry. That's a mechanical system. Mechanical systems are designed to have parts taken out and replaced. We are not mechanical systems, we are biological systems. We are designed to have our parts constantly replaced. As I understand it, we get about 4 billion new cells every day, right? Your eyeballs, your liver, your flesh, your blood, your bones. Every single day, 4 billion of your oldest, junkiest cells are being disassembled, salvageable parts retained, the rest of it out the rear end proceeds, and new ones built in their place. So you get your body is constantly being rebuilt. And on average, if you say how many human cells do you have and how many new ones do you get a day, you get a new body every 6 months. Right? Your bones take 7 years, your blood takes 2 weeks. Average it out, you get a new body every 6 months. 4 billion cells, 25 elements per cell for DNA. 4 billion times a day, just for basic bodily maintenance, you need 25 different elements for your body to maintain itself. That's not talking about your hormone system, your glandular system. That's not talking about everything else. That's just talking about basic bodily maintenance. So imagine, theoretically, that you were a human that was eating food that did not have 25 elements in it. Say theoretically. I mean, most of us get a full spectrum of nutrients in our food because we have high quality food in our, Right. The reality is that we don't have, in many cases, sufficient nutrients for our bodily systems to maintain themselves. So we'll just give you an example of chromium, because this is one that people have heard about. Chromium is an element that's at the core of an enzyme that's used for biochemical purposes, in this case, to replicate certain pieces of DNA, to screw pieces of DNA in. Like these ones require the chromium-based enzyme. If you don't have chromium in that environment, you don't have the chromium-based enzyme, then the pieces of DNA that are supposed to get put together by the chromium-based enzyme don't get put together. It's hanging loose, right? That one didn't get screwed in. They call that a genetic marker, a break in the DNA. Anybody heard about genetic markers? Heard about genetic markers for colon cancer or heart disease or breast cancer or diabetes? Yeah. They're like, the story is, I just random chance got a genetic marker. Ooh, well, bad luck. Do you believe in science and cause and effect, or do you believe in random chance? Last I checked, on this world of ours, everything has a cause and effect, right? It's not just random that we get these genetic markers, it's environmental conditions which cause them. So you don't have enough chromium in your diet, you get this genetic marker that gives you the propensity for diabetes, and now you're on insulin for the rest of your life. Or you start eating a diet that has chromium in it, and in 6 months, you get a new body, and every single one of those DNA strands, if the chromium was present, it's not like that break in the DNA can't get fixed. You just need the right socket to screw it in. So if you change your diet, if your diet has the nutrients in it that you need, you can reverse these chronic diseases, right? You can reverse these genetic markers. It's not like we're screwed. It's just that we have to eat well for a couple months. So that to me is the opportunity here with nutrient density. Yes?
What if the chromium is really high? The city of Livingston has some compost, and when I asked for the printout, and the chromium was too high for this EPA or whatever. It was on the edge, but what if it's... I was told by the state of Montana, if I use that, I wouldn't qualify as organic. It would just throw me out.
I can't speak to that specifically.
That's the one that has the biosludge in it too, isn't it?
It's biosludge in there, and I was curious.
Well,
'cause I asked
that's
them-
illegal in the first place, and it should be.
Huh?
I said, that's illegal in the first place, and it should be for organic
Yeah.
sludge, sewage sludge.
Oh, okay.
You guys know what that stuff is?
Think of molasses of sugar, that's all your pharmaceuticals in the biosludge, in your compost, going in your garden.
It's not just what people put in their bodies that comes out their rear end. It's also all the things that they have in bottles that they dump down the sink. All the toxins. Sludge is a toxic material. It is illegal to use on organic farms, and it should be illegal to use on any farms. And when the government took over organic in 2000, that was one of the things that the people said screw you about, because they had made it so you could use sludge. And there was this massive grassroots people, hundreds of thousands of people said no, for good reason. So that stuff,
Well, they're condemning farms on the East Coast for using biosludge.
I thought they were shipping it out from New York City to spread it out in farms out here in Colorado. That's a whole conversation. Septic
So
systems.
what do I do with it?
I don't want to talk about that right now because I got not enough time left and a bunch of things I want to get into.
Go ahead.
Can you talk a little more about where you're going with this nutrient density? Because, Jesse and I have hours of conversation about the challenges that we face as nutritionists trying to help shift a paradigm around what real food looks like
Yeah.
in individuals, in families, in communities, in systems like school systems. And I'm just curious what you see your organization and the contribution, where you'd like that contribution to affect the things that we're seeing a ton of pushback against, even
Yeah.
within the agricultural community in general. This facade that it
I would be
change
happy
that.
to end on that, but I want to just, so basically the next, whatever it is, 15 slides are basically seminal thinkers. The titles are called seminal thinkers. And I'm not going to have time to do that. But these are people who most people haven't heard of, who have pieces of the puzzle that are very powerful and relevant. So I'm not even going to try to do those today, but I do want to I just did biology and chemistry. I want to go to physics and quantum mechanics, and then we can have that conversation. So yes. So I talked about the DNA and the application, and you get a new body. And so physics is this thing that we understand that everything in chemistry is a thing. At least that's how we explain it to school kids. But it really, everything is a vibration. They also say. So how does that work? Don't quite understand. The point is that everything vibrates, and I like to use the example of an elementary school band concert. Anybody ever been to an elementary school band concert?
Yeah.
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 So
They're amazing.
exquisitely cute, right? But also exquisitely. There's a technical term in music called dissonance,
Yes.
right? Vibrational dissonance. It's out of tune. It's not harmonic. So you know what that is, right? We viscerally know what dissonance is. That's as like a framing point. And we also maybe have had the experience of a beautiful a cappella choir, and everybody had the experience of like four voices singing perfectly in tune, and this thing called harmonics that occurs, like a higher octave is sounded. The opera singer hits the high C and the wine glass shatters. There's vibration, which is part of reality. We talked about the insect's antenna, which is good because it's a piece of this vibration conversation. So let's talk about your DNA as a thing in chemistry, but as a vibration in physics, right? Because it is a thing in chemistry, but a vibration in physics. And so if you have all of your DNA properly built, then you're vibrating in tune, then you have these higher octaves being manifested. But if you're poorly built DNA, if you don't have that chromium, that enzyme isn't there, then you're vibrating more like that elementary school band concert. So from a foundational standpoint, just like a rudimentary foundational standpoint, we've got a vibe. People have a vibe, right? Your body has a vibe. It has energy. It's out of tune. Like, this is what's so exciting to me about nutrient density is, like, as we build our bodies out of our food, it can become more and more dissonant or more and more coherent. And so that's like the physics piece, and then the quantum mechanics, I'll say that, and then we'll just end this whole broad section. I think I referenced dark matter and dark energy a couple of times. I said that the vast majority of reality, according to our Western scientists, is not on frequency range that we can find with any of our instruments, 96% of reality is somewhere else. This is like pretty much everything else I've said here in this course. I can back up with some citation or Western scientific, like literature piece. This is the piece that I want to add to this conversation. This is my hypothesis based on what seems to be a bunch of data points that are aligned, but I don't think I've got a data point to like hide behind the science of this comment. I'm just going to propose a concept that reality is like a piano keyboard, that you've got multiple octaves on the piano keyboard, right? You've got low, low C and C and high, all these different octaves. So my concept is that the physical plane is one octave of reality, and there's other octaves that our quote unquote scientific instruments can't perceive. That's why they can't find it, dark matter, dark energy, but that are actually our instruments, our physical bodies that our souls have inhabited or inhabiting, do have the capacity to perceive. So we talked again about you walk into the hoop house and the planets say, "Hey, how's it going?" Right? That's not one of your 5 physical senses, but it's definitely a sense. You've made probably some important life decisions based on a sense from within, a heart knowing, not a physical plane sense, but some deeper sense, right? Most of us actually make our important life decisions from that place of another level of knowing, another level of perception. I would propose that, coherence, consciousness is, this sort of a broader metaphysical spiritual truth of oneness is just a high vibration of coherence. And as we physically are vibrating out of tune, it becomes extremely difficult to tune into the overtones of consciousness. From a foundational standpoint, if we're out of tune, we're out of tune, right? We can't tune into our higher natures. So this is why I'm so focused on nutrient density, is because I think foundationally, all of our cultural dysfunctions are made out of people. The political system is made out of people, the economic system is made out of people, the media system is made out of people, the educational system. I mean, which system can you look at and say is functioning well at this point, right? I would say in many cases, our systems are dysfunctional because we are dysfunctional. And so my thought is, this is a profound spiritual covert op, right? If we can increase quality in the food supply, if we can create a dynamic where the food that we're building our bodies out of next year is more coherent than it was last year or this year, and so on, if we get new bodies every 6 months, if simply by the act of eating food, which most people do with some regularity, if the food they ate was better and they built their bodies functionally out of it more well, then they would be able to tune into their higher natures more well, right? The way we solve problems is not by fighting them. The way we solve problems is by building the solution. If the issue foundationally is that we are incoherent, then building coherence in ourselves will hold the space for greater coherence in our culture. So, I would say, don't fight climate change, don't fight the political dynamics, don't fight the war, build coherence, produce high quality food, align the economic incentives so that we are inspired from within, from our own personal drivers to do this, and we'll create the framework for the systemic solutions that so many of us are hungry for. And maybe bring about a dynamic where we're surrounded by people who are more harmonious, where we don't have these struggles of dissonance and separation and incoherence, where we can actually have a greater fulfillment. For me, the most selfish thing I can do is be around people who have a high vibe, right? My quality of life is improved by having people around me be happy and healthy and loving. So, I consider this to be the most selfish thing I can do. It's profoundly selfish to create a reality where everyone else is harmonious. Right? That is how I can improve my quality of life. So I wanted to just end on that point, at least the slides part, and we can talk about the deeper strategy and where we're going with all this. But just to share, personally, that's my agenda. is to, ground coherence in people through, a coherent body. There's much more to it, right? Food is not just the physical substance we take in, it's the ideas, right? The media, the conversations, the relationships, right? I mean, if you're in an unhealthy relationship, that stress, not necessarily a partner relationship, it could be a work relationship. Like wherever we have those stresses in our lives, that incoherence, that affects our vibration, right? So it's not, increasing quality in the food supply is not just about the physical food. It's really about the media and the relationships and the dynamics with nature and land, the Wi-Fi, the 3G, the 5G, right? It's all these dynamics that we're constantly taking in which affect our vibe. So we're starting with nutrients and food, but really it's about a much deeper conversation. So I'll end my formal presentation there, but love to have you restate your question.
Well, I kind of feel like you just answered it, honestly. I mean,
Okay.
I was just really interested in what your organization was doing to address these systems that are so sick and what your perspective was on, I guess, you answered it by covertly coming in. Because some of the challenges that we face as nutritionists, and people often come to see us after they've, hit their heads on a brick wall from long-term health-related things. And individually, I see people having a really hard time making changes because I don't see change happening in individual scenarios. We've never done that. We've never ever fostered change as individuals, as a species. It's always been within community and interrelated community.
Yeah.
And so I guess what you said makes a lot of sense, specifically when you said not fighting, like working to address it from an underlying perspective.
Yeah. That's what the meter's for.
Mhm.
The meter's for us to be able to choose the food that's most nutritious off the shelf. And, most people eat food on a regular basis, and they generally spend money to purchase it. And so if we can empower them to choose the best stuff for themselves and their family because they have this visceral need, and that's all you can do. Most people aren't able to just go and be a farmer, even though I'd like that to be the possibility. Maybe they don't even want to, which is, I can't even understand that concept. But if we can empower people to make these decisions, then that sort of pulls through this solution set.
Well, and how do you address the fact that, for lack of better words, most people don't give a shit what they put in their body?
Don't worry about it. Forget about it. It's not your problem.
It actually is my problem because it's my profession. and as a farmer, it's kind of all of our
It's
problem.
really everybody's problem, though.
Yeah.
I mean, because if I'm sick and I'm surrounded by other people, it's going to affect everybody. I mean, that's the whole point of this conversation is that, we have an epidemic of chronic disease. It's the most plaguing thing, the human environment and the natural environment, the climate, they're paralleling with each other. And we all have these pain points in our personal lives. If you have somebody who's sick in your life, you've said this multiple times, it takes all of your money, your attention, your time, your energy, it takes everything out of you to solve that problem. And so if one person is sick, everybody's gonna suffer because of it.
Yeah.
And so it's just really important, and you've said so many times, and I keep thinking about the onion analogy that you made that was so important, is what you eat, consume, whether it's social media or the food you're eating or the people that you're around, this is gonna determine your human potential, right? Food is like a very visceral, literal communication between the outside world and you, and it communicates to your cells whether there's enough, whether there's abundance and there's health, and you can go forward. And I think about children all the time when we're having this conversation, and I think everybody in this room is probably connected to a young person who they would, lay their life down on the ground for. And that's kind of the point of what we're doing, it's like this groundswell of movement at the people level. We're getting gaslit from politicians, we're getting gaslit from the media. I mean, we're just getting all this bad information, but intuitively, I think we all know that's out of alignment with what needs to happen. And so thinking about this conversation and human potential and how important this is, I mean, I just am so glad I came, and I really enjoyed hearing everything you had to say. I was just, smiling from ear to ear, and I'm gonna take so much of what you said and think about it for so long. Like, it's just, it's everything. It's what you do, it's how you live, how we live. It's just, yeah, it's all so important. And you guys are growers. I'm like a grower fan. I'm like a fangirl of growers. I'm not like, I mean, I have a garden in my house, but I'm not like a farmer. And so, the products and your desire, the products that you put out there and your desire to make them better, is something, there's no incentives at this point right now in the system to do that. But if people get the education and the information that they need to know that that's the solution to their pain points, they'll go for it. And that's all I care about.
That's
all I'm
the
doing.
strategy.
And that's exactly what it's talking.
Yes.
That's what we're doing is, for us personally, is get to a point where you can grow the nutrient-dense foods, which you have literally moved us so far down that line with this day and a half. Forget the people that don't want to change themselves. Bring the people that do want. Get them, change them with the food, and people will be like, I want that. And then you're not pulling that horse to the water. They will come when you create that symbiosis of that, and you start giving people that. They'll find that out and seek that out themselves. But
I don't know that you even need them to do that. I think the idea that the system changes, that the grocery store is going to stock the food that those people have initiated.
But that's
It's
money.
a matter
That's
of
based
carrot.
on greed, and you're not going to
But
change.
but that grocery store is the place where society is
That's
getting their nutrition. It's
society's
not the
wrong.
farmer's market.
No,
Well,
but there are people that run the
They're not
grocery
farmers,
stores. There's
farm,
people that
yes.
run the grocery stores who care about their children, right? I mean, and who probably would like to be providing the better quality food. There's people who have children that are in school that would like the school meals to be of a certain caliber. There's people that are representatives and senators in Congress that write the farm bill that have children. I mean, the world is made up of people. And so my experience is when you have a conversation with a person about these ideas, I don't know if I've ever found anybody who didn't agree, right? It's like, it just kind of makes sense. And so the question is, can you make it easy to do something? Can you have some opportunity to take a step in the right direction? I mean, I'm these days talking to people that are part of big corporations that as a child I would have been taught are bad people. And I'm partnering with universities that as a child I would have been taught are bad people, right? And we're now in relationship with people in government and who as a child were taught were bad people. But I think, the opportunity of today is the profound nature of the crisis. Like, it's not possible to ignore it anymore, and most people have some personal connection to it, which is deeply visceral. And so they care because they're people, and they will move the levers that they have of a business or a government or a university because they're people. And when you get that buy-in, when you get that like heartfelt, like I'm doing this because I want it for my family, visceral thing, it's not because I want a career move. It's not because I want more money. It's because I truly believe it. My experience is just about everywhere people get this. And so that's the opportunity. And that's, is to put together a series of steps that are simple and doable and honorable. And so that's really the strategy behind the meter is to have a thing that you can get behind and coordinate around that can facilitate these broader shifts. So like I said, that $3.5 million, like to have the meter out there, so we've got 10 in every city that now is shifting the market in every city. We're like not far away from being able, I think, to actually begin to turn this thing quick. So, there's great people. Anyways.
You said, a sentence that was absolutely.
He did. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Tell me, I'm looking forward to seeing
It's been recorded. It's been recorded, yes.
And it ties in with what you just said about everyone has, from your word, connection with young people, right?
Yeah.
Whom you would lay your life down on the ground for.
That was a sentence.
Yeah, what you said.
Yeah.
And we have interpreted that to mean that you adopt it.
Yeah,
That's not what you said.
well, I would
But I
definitely.
interpreted it and the soil is where we lay our lives to build the world our children, we want our children to live in.
It's that commitment to the solution that's going to empower all children. This is the thing for me. I've got children, and to some extent, I don't have a relationship with them as deep as I'd like to because I'm out here around the world. But from a foundational standpoint, if I am successful, the world that they step into will be a much healthier world for them. Because we all know that you can do only so much to provide, protect, care for a child before the cultural dynamics are just an absolute crapshoot. So what we're talking about for our children is creating a world where they actually have a plausible scenario of success and to begin to heal some of these cultural traumas that have been built in multiple generations and things like that. So that's absolutely what I'm doing, but I'm not willing to die for my child. I'm just gonna put my entire life force into what I think is the solution, I think which is your point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's also biblical.
I'm not a mother. Maybe if I was a mother,
Oh, I just said
Yeah, I
that.
know.
I literally just said that.
There's the man-woman thing, yeah.
I made those, I
Yeah.
know, I made those people,
yeah, no,
it's totally
100%.
different.
And I didn't talk about the brains thing, but just a little minor point here with Stephen Herod Buhner. Does Buhner live out here somewhere? Is he in Utah? Anybody know Buhner?
Yeah,
Is he around?
I don't know. but
Used to be in Vermont. Now he's out here somewhere. Stephen Herod Buhner, beautiful series of books. He's one of the people in the seminal thinker category. But we were talking about antenna. The insects have antenna, right? The neurons, these brain cells, these big long filamentous things function as an antenna, right? We are wired with antenna. This is actually how it works. We know things. We can perceive things in our mind. Like you grok an idea, not by having it logically explained, but like somebody says enough of the words and you tune into it, right? You know something in your heart. You're vibrating. You're sensing. You sense it there with your gut, right? But women have a fourth brain, right? You guys have a fourth organ full of neurons called a uterus. So one of the things I like to say is, you guys have 4 brains. We have 3. So don't give us a hard time. Right? Just don't give us a hard time. End of conversation. We mean well. We do mean well, but we just are not operating with the full operating system you guys have.
Just move over to that 4th brain.
Yeah.
Doing our best. Hopefully, doing our best. Just don't expect out of us what you expect out of yourself. Yeah.
Right.
Can I ask, I'm sorry to ask all these questions, but this is a part that gets me really excited as both a nutritionist and a farmer.
Yeah.
And an educator. And so, how do you see your work and guiding principles working towards increasing access to food to the people who are often left behind,
Yeah.
demographics, not
Totally.
just our young people,
Yeah.
but marginalized groups,
Yeah.
food deserts,
Yeah.
people who don't have access. Can you talk a little bit about how
Sure.
you see affecting change in those areas?
For starters, let's get out of this privileged U.S. context.
Yeah.
Stop thinking about people in the U.S. as the bottom of the totem pole. Think about all the people on the planet. So if we're not thinking about all the people on the planet, we're operating from a privileged cultural paradigm. So that's the first one. Like, it's not about U.S. We, relatively speaking, are extraordinarily privileged in many cases. My impulse came from being in villages in South India, documenting farmer suicides, understanding that, the opportunity was to sell your daughter into prostitution or live in a slum, right? And that's why they committed suicide. Because that's what you're facing. And so then you commit suicide so that you don't have to deal with it, right? Global desertification, starvation, if we are not developing a systemic solution for the entire planet, we're missing the point. I think, it's not gonna turn hunky-dory on a dime. We have to build solutions that are systemic, focus on what we want to see and do everything we can to move towards that. Why I have the last slide on this presentation saying rock dust and seawater is because my understanding is those are the things we might need to bring in from off-site along with a little bit of cover crop seed maybe, to regreen the planet. And we're not gonna solve these problems globally until we're actually taking responsibility for regreening the planet. It's not about slowing down climate change, not about reducing your carbon burn. Come on, guys. We need to solve the problem. And we do that by working with nature to, bring life back to a much higher degree on much more of the planet. And I think foundationally, we were having this argument outside last night, like I'm of the opinion, we don't belong in cities. We belong on land. We're animals, we belong in nature. The indigenous communities tell us our role is caretaker of land. So foundationally, humans don't belong in slums, in projects, in cities, working for money, working for the system. They belong in right relationship with nature. So in my mind, we don't succeed until we get to that point. There's a whole bunch of steps between here and there, like food deserts, like pre-existing conditions, what it was with COVID, the people that had access to poor quality food had much more likelihood of death and negative effects. The White House just had a conference on Wednesday about nutrition. The Farm Bill is being organized around right now in preparation for some potentially very significant things next year. They just dropped $3 billion on carbon, farming strategies. I think what's so exciting is the crisis is everywhere. It's so exciting that the crisis is everywhere because finally people are ready to focus on solutions. And what they need is a viable solution set. The ideas can spread very rapidly. Ideas do spread very rapidly. If we have a good idea, I think we can turn this around very rapidly. As an example, talk about school lunches, right? It would be really easy if the next Farm Bill said that if you're going to sell into the school lunch program, your food has to be of a certain caliber, right? And that's the kind of thing we can organize around. WIC, whatever, food stamps, whatever you want to call it, whatever they're called, SNAP benefits. It would be really easy if those benefits only went to things that were nutritious, right? We have plenty of people who don't have access to resources. We have governmental structures which are there to support them. We need to take responsibility for those governmental structures being honorable, which they're now not. So I'm one person out of 8 billion, right? We've all got our opportunities, our callings, our missions, our purposes. There's plenty of people that are activists that are focusing on governmental reform and school lunch meals and all that kind of stuff. Let's build a broad movement that can, so that was my strategy from the very beginning. Who can disagree with food being more nutritious? Right? Who's against that? So it's about building a coalition. It's about building a movement. It's about having a common cause. What's that?
The food industry. The chemical companies, the food industry,
As a person, in any of these systems, people are busy, building really sophisticated bombs, right? But they have children. They do it because they make a good living. They don't feel good about it. People are involved in genetic modification of seeds and all kinds of other perverse stuff and dicamba and whatever else. They don't really feel good about it, right? Their heart is not there. They really want to do something different, but they're in the system where they've got college debt and they've got a mortgage and they're keeping up with the Joneses and have a fancy car, and that's the only way to do it is by being part of a system, but their heart's not in it. I say let's work with Monsanto. Let's work with McDonald's. Let's have McDonald's and Burger King competing to have the more nutrient dense burger. Let's use the Monsanto global supply chain to be distributing inoculants and cover crop seeds. Right? We don't have to envision all of these entities as adversaries. We can provide them the opportunity to take forward steps from where they are. It's not black and white. We're never going to go from 0 to 100. Let's go from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 and have this be a momentum. And as long as people feel safe and empowered, they can let go of what they're doing. I don't see any other way forward. Fighting obviously doesn't work. Right? So let's just ignore that. Let's ignore the you're bad, us, them. We've got our noses up because we're better than you. That's a wrong thought. We just got to get out of that paradigm and say, how can we work together? Where are the opportunities for collaboration and synergy? And focus on that. The political, bifurcation that's been going on across, I mean, at least the culture that I can see here in the US recently with COVID, and the people that you thought you had the same perspective with, and now the people you really don't think you have the same perspective with, like, we actually were friends because we had a lot in common. We can focus on what we disagree about and like talk smack and get angry and not, rifts in our families, or we can focus on what we have in common.
Yeah.
It's about where we put our attention and our consciousness and what we focus on. And if you tune into the media, you tune into the social media, which is all designed to facilitate divide and conquer, you are part of the problem. Divide and conquer is a strategy of empire. At any point in time that you are repeating the messages of divide and conquer, you are part of the colonial mastery, right? You are the colonizer. When you are engaging in a process of coming together and collaboration, then you are the indigenous, person. Like, we have both things. We can tune into anything with our consciousness. It's our controlling our mind and controlling our, our attention and where we put it. So it's really easy to slip into these things. And if we don't engage in our what is it? Spiritual hygiene, mental, emotional hygiene, we are part of the problem. So get the them out of your lexicon. Don't ever bother looking down on anyone. If you're going to critique anybody, critique yourself. Don't put yourself down, just improve yourself. That's how I see it.
Somebody famous said that once.
I'm not sure.
Said it's not least you judge yourself. I think Jesus said.
Was that Jesus? I'm sorry, I'm
I got a
not.
real practical.
I wasn't brought up in the Christian
If,
tradition.
if we buy products from your site and
Yeah.
give some of this material to our friends and family that are open to it, are we helping you get to that $3 million?
No. No, we make no money on anything we're doing,
What isn't that?
and it's actually hassle.
But is that before we go to that, is that a bridge? This seems to be a bridge to opening a conversation with people that aren't yet thinking much about this. Hey, have you heard about this before?
So we were talking last night about this $3 million thing, and I'm deeply processing it, and I've got my vision about what's good and right, and I've been trying to do it to the best of my ability, but I'm not necessarily good at a business plan. I mean, we've got strengths and weaknesses, all of us do. Mine is a good business plan is not one of my strengths. But I mean, after this conversation we were having last night, I mean, it was Max and Robin and I were up. You guys all went to bed. Like, I was looking forward to hanging out, but like, where the hell is everybody? Come on, it's only 11 o'clock.
You got farmers during harvest season.
I'm from the East Coast. It's 1 a.m. for me. But this is party time, guys. This is like, you gotta sit down and listen to me, but the real opportunity is to hang out together afterwards. But what I came to was, maybe I should just ask.
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe I should just use the resources of the organization
Yes.
to put it out
Crowdsource.
and say, here's what we're doing and we need your help, and $5, $50, $50,000 all goes towards it.
Do you know if there's an option?
So
on
that was a big
the website
realization
to
for me.
donate, not just to buy the things that you don't profit
Yeah.
from, but to donate, is that an option on your?
If you can find it.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, that's
I
what
because
he's
I feel like we've got, 30 megaphones here, so we've all got work we wanna do for ourselves, but we have the ability to make our own contribution towards
Yes.
the $5 or whatever.
Yep.
And then to,
Tell your friends.
to tell our friends, and
If I would
bet
organize it in such a fashion that it would be easy for you to do
We
it.
have the ability to get you there.
Yeah.
It's so totally true.
I mean, that's the, like I was
Which
saying
gets us
yesterday. That's, like I was saying yesterday, that
have a donate page.
And it says 2021 campaign looking for $100,000. If you read it, I think. Yeah, there is a donate page on the website.
But it's not donating to that project, it's donating to
It's
the
something we
overall
put up 2
project.
years ago and haven't gotten around to fixing because we're too busy doing all the rest of the stuff.
Right.
Running the labs.
Bottleneck then.
One of the problems with not having enough money in having grand visions is there's all this, anybody know about like too many details? About too many details in life?
Time to mess with a website is not
The right person,
money
the money to
us,
pay the right
not
person to,
paying the bills, but.
yeah.
But if it's there, we all can work on it and we can let people know that that's old messaging.
There are some crowdfunding things that really work for some people. If that message hits, they oversubscribe, so.
Yeah,
There's also a holiday coming up where a lot of people give things away to other people.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing. That's
our
another
target is to
thing.
raise the money by the end of the year. And so that gives me 3 months right now, which is actually,
Roughly a
ton of time
1.2
if you're a
million
farmer.
per month.
well, 6 million we're looking for, because
Oh, so 2
there's the building the meter, which doesn't pay any salaries for anybody, which doesn't do the research, doesn't do the courses, doesn't do the local chapters, doesn't do the conference. I mean, so yeah, I mean, the meter, whatever it is, 3.5, that's a big old chunk. Like, we've never gotten that much money in a year, full stop. So, but yeah, I mean, I am actively, we're actually in a place, we actually have a budget, right? And we had a deck now too, I think, a deck, right? You heard about those things? Like, we never had a budget in a deck before, so we're doing good.
Next, like to sit on or two.
No, like a PowerPoint deck, which says like, the like,
I thought you meant like a.
for the overall funding of the organization, this is what it's for, and for the meter specifically.
Pitch deck, right?
What's that?
A pitch deck?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Not particularly fancy, because we don't actually have any with good graphic design skills, but it's, we do have a budget.
We've got
and
all
we-
these people.
We got all kinds of amazing people, and it's a question of asking and being receptive and not sort of like, I'm gonna do it, and I don't need anybody's help. So we all have our issues, right, that we manifest. So this is obviously one of mine.
Well, and as growers.
But thank you for the support and the attention, I appreciate it.
As growers, I keep pointing all these gardeners to your thing to buy the minerals and
Yes.
help them get going, but I want that to help you too, so why don't you add $5 to it, nobody would mind. That would go
We
to
have to
the-
add about $50 to it to make it actually,
to
we
the
lose
meters or
money.
Whatever.
Well,
I mean,
that's a fundamental flaw of your business plan.
Well,
Give
I-
it away. As much as we appreciate it.
Well, I give the YouTube away, but give people the opportunity, if you like this and want other people to see it, we could use $50.
Just put a link at the end of the YouTube
Yeah.
with so that's what I'm thinking, and I'm so grateful that we're getting this recorded. And I think Anthony was talking about last night, I heard about like the little bits, right? There's like a couple 2-minute, 3-minute, 5-minute bits that I have done that maybe would be standalone worthy.
Yeah.
Right? Cutting them all out, because apparently people, we had this conversation last night too, people actually spend a lot of time on social media. Have you heard this? I don't believe it. I still don't believe it. I don't do it, so it must not be true, right? But apparently social media is going towards video. Like, they want you to do videos. So how many bits can we pull out of the last 2 days that turn into 3-minute pieces that can have a link to a donate page at the end?
Yeah.
And how many of you would forward those to your friends?
Beginning and end to end. You want the donation page at the beginning because.
I don't want to be
3
too
minutes
pushy.
3 minutes is a lot of time.
If it's
Yeah,
good,
it's
if it's good, you're gonna wait till the end.
It's 1 minute reels.
No.
Works. So just do it on both. Just do it on both. I'm just saying.
All right.
Or don't. But 3 minutes for a social media platform
Yeah.
is a lot.
I'm really appreciating this. Thank you. Yeah.
Totally changing topics, back to the cows and the fecal material that you figured out with the meter, what was with that?
What's with the fecal material with the cows? Well, we understand that, people have irritable bowel syndrome, and that connects to certain biochemical imbalances, and there's certain microbes at certain levels and ratios that correlate with these, health status dynamics. So when we're defining nutrient density in beef, who the hell are we to say anything? We want to build a large enough data set to show the patterns that can align with everything else that we already know. So it's not just the good nutrients, like the omega-6, omega-3 ratio has got lots of omega-3s, or the polyphenols and antioxidants. It's the negative nutrients in the beef. So the stress hormones, the inflammation markers, the pre-diabetic state biochemistry, right? If you have cows that are under stress, that aren't using their bodies, that are fat and eating bad food, their biochemistry looks like the biochemistry of a human that's stressed, not getting much exercise, eating bad food, right? And we have those markers identified. We have the markers identified with the microbiome of humans of these dynamics. So we're basically building this categorical database, categorical argument through the data to show that these nutrient levels and ratios are beneficial for you and these are detrimental to you. For us to presume to say, this is better, this is worse, right? To be able to put that on a label, to be able to market that, to be able to claim that, to be able to go to a point where you can say, like, incontrovertibly, scientifically, this beef is not as good as that beef, like, you better be hiding behind a bunch of science. And so that's what we're doing.
Do we just put hamburger?
This meter is not gonna work for beef.
That meter won't.
No, this meter is working on nutrient variation, which is like 12 elements and 3 compounds. There's a whole nother level of nutrient density. Like I said, this is an Apple II.
Right.
We want to get to the Macintosh, and then we want to get to the MacBook, and then we want to get to the iPhone. So we're not at MacBook, we're not at Macintosh, we're at Apple II. So yeah, there's a bunch of steps remaining, but I do think a consumer mass-produced Apple II that is calibrated for crops you can use in the grocery store is going to be putting a serious shot across the bow to the whole process. And with the White House conference this past week, and all kinds of other dynamics going on and momentum building, a few tens of millions of dollars to pull this whole thing off is absolutely chump change, right? The foundational money necessary to accomplish the core piece of this is really zilch. And then all kinds of people can make all kinds of billions and trillions of dollars by doing it right, by doing the right thing, which is the way it's going to happen. So, time's up.
Yeah, just, people gonna be riding short.
Yeah.